My grandmother always said the most dangerous thing in the world is a little black girl who has already done her homework. She never got to meet Zola, but somehow she knew her. Picture a boardroom in Atlanta, Georgia. 11 adults around a long conference table. Lawyers, donors, elected officials, every one of them holding the futures of thousands of children in their hands. Not one of them losing a minute of sleep over it. In the corner of that room, on a chair too tall for her feet to reach the floor, sat a 9-year-old girl in a navy blue dress, yellow notebook in her lap, saying nothing, watching everything. In 20 minutes, those adults were going to vote to eliminate the one program keeping thousands of kids connected to school. They had numbers. They had policy. They had authority. She had a notebook. And she had already done her homework. Before we go any further, drop a comment right now and tell me where you're watching from and what time it is in your city. I read every single one. And if you're new here, hit subscribe. You are going to want to stay for this one. The alarm on Diana Carter's phone was set for 6:30. She never needed it. By the time it buzzed on the nightstand, Zola had already been awake for an hour. Diana could tell not because her daughter made noise, but because the kitchen light was on. It was always on when Zola was thinking. Diana patted out in her house slippers, tightening her robe against the cold that seeped through the thin walls of their two-bedroom apartment in Vine City. Outside, Atlanta was still gray. The thermometer mounted on the window ledge read 44 degrees. The oak tree in the courtyard below stood bare and completely still, its branches dark and skeletal against a pale November sky. Somewhere down the block, a car engine turned over and turned over and failed again. The city was waking up slowly, reluctantly, the way it always did on a cold morning in the middle of the week. Zola was at the kitchen table. She was still in her pajamas, a worn set with small blue stars faded from too many washes, but she had already put on her white socks. It was a habit Diana had stopped questioning years ago. Zola always put on socks first, before pants, before a shirt, before anything else. As if the day could not properly begin until her feet were covered and grounded. Her hair was pulled into two low puffs, slightly uneven. She had done them herself in the dark, Diana guessed, so as not to wake anyone. In front of her, spread across the kitchen table in careful order, were three items: her yellow notebook, its cover soft and worn at every corner, a red rubber band looped around the middle to keep it closed, a library copy of the autobiography of Frederick Douglass, a post-it flag marking a page somewhere near the center, and three printed pages from the Georgia Department of Education website, their edges slightly curled from being folded and unfolded too many times. Zola was not reading. She was writing. Small, precise letters moving across the notebook page, her pen stopping occasionally to check a number on one of the printed sheets before moving on. Diana stood in the doorway a moment before speaking. "Zola." She moved to the counter and filled the coffee maker. "You were supposed to sleep in." "I did." Zola did not look up. "Until 5:30. That's not sleeping in, baby." "Mama, did you know that schools with active arts programs have a 14% higher graduation rate?" She tapped one of the printed pages with her pen. "It's right here in the Georgia report. Page 7. Diana looked at her daughter, this small, serious person who had come into the world already paying attention to things most adults never noticed. "Where did you even find that report?" "Their website. It's public record." Diana poured her coffee and held the mug with both hands. She did not answer. Some mornings there was simply nothing useful left to say. 6 months earlier, on a warm afternoon in late May, a white envelope had arrived in their mailbox with the return address of the Harmon Foundation, printed in clean navy lettering across the top left corner. Zola had been at school. Diana had opened it alone, standing right there at the mailbox because she could not make herself wait. She read it twice. Then she walked upstairs, sat down at the kitchen table, the same chair, and stayed there for a long time without moving. The letter was polite. 3 short paragraphs. It acknowledged that Zola had performed exceptionally on the Harmon Arts and STEM Academy entrance, assessment reading, comprehension in the 98th percentile mathematics, in the 97th, placing her among the top 2% of all applicants statewide. It acknowledged her teacher's letters of recommendation, which it described as compelling and sincere. And then in the second paragraph it said no. Application status denied. Reason: incomplete program certification. Applicant's current institution does not hold an approved arts program designation under Board Resolution 2024-17. A valid certification signature from a board-approved program coordinator is required for eligibility. This requirement cannot be waived. Diana read that paragraph 3 more times. She knew what Board Resolution 2024-17 was. She had sat in the audience months earlier when the Whitfield Committee introduced it, a quiet policy update buried deep inside a longer agenda presented as routine administrative housekeeping. Nobody had raised a hand. Nobody had understood yet what it would actually mean in practice, what doors it would quietly lock, whose children it would leave standing on the wrong side of the threshold. Vine City Elementary did not have a board-approved arts program coordinator. It never had. The funding had simply never been there, which meant no certification, which meant no signature, which meant that no matter how Zola scored, her application would never clear the eligibility gate they had built without telling anyone. Diana put the letter in the kitchen drawer beneath the dish towels. She did not tell Zola the real reason it was denied. She said only, "They filled all the spots this year, baby. We'll try again." Zola had nodded slowly, the way she always nodded when she was filing something away, rather than actually accepting it. She had not cried. She went to her room and Diana heard nothing for the rest of the evening. 2 weeks later, Zola found the letter. Diana did not know exactly when. But one evening, Zola came to her in the living room, stood quietly in front of the television, and said, "Mama, they didn't fill all the spots. They changed the rules." Diana went very still. Board Resolution 2024-17. It passed in March. It changed the certification requirement for the scholarship application. Zola's voice was even, completely factual. "Our school can't meet it. Neither can the 6 other schools in our district. I checked the directory." Diana could not find a single word. "So they changed the rules," Zola said almost to herself. "And nobody told anyone they changed the rules." She turned off the television and walked back to her room. That night, Diana heard her daughter moving long after lights out, the soft, steady scratch of a pen across paper pages, turning quietly in the dark. That was the night the yellow notebook began to fill up. By the morning of the board meeting 3 weeks later, Diana had asked Zola twice to stay home. "Baby, it's not a place for children. Miss Patterson is going." Zola looked up calmly from the table. "She said I could come with you both." Diana studied her daughter the navy blue dress Zola had changed into, while Diana was not looking the white socks already on the old black shoes lined up neatly beside the door. The yellow notebook was already tucked under her arm, held shut with its red rubber band. "Zola," Diana said carefully, "even if we say something today, they won't listen. They never do." Zola looked at her mother, not with frustration, not with the impatience children sometimes wear when they are certain they know better, with something quieter and older than that, something that looked in a way Diana could not quite name, like patience that had already been tested and had held. "Mama," she reached for her coat from the back of the chair. "I need to see it for myself." Diana stood there one more second. Then she reached for her keys. She had no idea that inside that notebook, tucked beneath 3 weeks of careful, methodical research, her 9-year-old daughter was carrying something that could bring down the entire vote. The Atlanta Unified School District Administrative Building sat on the corner of Trinity Avenue and Central, a structure of glass and pale concrete that had always struck Diana as the architectural equivalent of a form letter, functional, impersonal, and designed to make you feel slightly smaller than you actually were. They arrived at 8:47. Ms. Renee Patterson was already waiting outside the entrance, her long wool coat buttoned to the collar, a canvas tote bag over one shoulder. She was a compact woman in her late 50s with reading glasses pushed up into her natural hair, and the posture of someone who had spent decades standing in front of rooms full of people who weren't listening. She looked down at Zola. "You ready?" "Yes, ma'am." Miss Patterson held the door open without another word. The lobby was cold and smelled of industrial coffee and fresh toner. A security guard behind a desk checked their names against a printed list. When he reached Zola, he paused, looked up, then looked back down. "Is she registered to speak?" "She's with us," Miss Patterson said, in the tone she reserved for conversations that were already finished. The guard let them through. The meeting room was at the end of a long hallway with fluorescent lighting and linoleum floors the color of old oatmeal. Inside, the space was larger than Diana had expected, a U-shaped conference table at the front, 11 chairs along its outer edge for board members, and 4 rows of public seating, already nearly full. Parents, teachers, a few people Diana recognized from the neighborhood association. Everyone had dressed carefully the way people dress when they are hoping that looking serious will make them be taken seriously. Zola scanned the room once. Then she walked to a chair near the back corner, closest to the wall, and sat down. She pulled the yellow notebook from under her arm, removed the rubber band, and opened to a page already covered in small handwriting. She uncapped her pen. She did not look nervous. She looked like someone who had arrived exactly where she intended to be. At the center of the board table, Chairman Richard Whitfield arranged his papers with the unhurried precision of a man who had run enough of these meetings to know exactly how they would go. He was 58 years old with silver hair combed back from a wide forehead and wire-rimmed glasses worn low on his nose when reading. His suit was charcoal gray. His tie was burgundy. He addressed Diana thought like a verdict. What most people in the room did not know was that Whitfield had spent 15 years as a mathematics teacher in the Atlanta public school system before moving into administration. He had grown up in Decatur, the son of a postal worker and a home health aide, and put himself through Georgia State on Pell Grants and weekend shifts at a grocery warehouse. He believed with the particular certainty of a man who had constructed his own way out of poverty that the most valuable thing an underfunded school could give a child was a direct practical path to economic mobility. Arts programs in his framework were a luxury that schools like Vine City simply could not afford to prioritize. He was not a cruel man. He was a certain one. And in the wrong position, certainty can do damage that cruelty never could because it never stops to question itself. To Whitfield's right, Gerald Harmon sat with his phone face down on the table. He was younger than Whitfield by a decade, with a trim beard going gray at the jaw and the relaxed posture of someone accustomed to rooms deferring to him. He had not spoken yet. He had not needed to. The meeting was called to order at 9 o'clock exactly. Whitfield presented the budget reallocation proposal with the confidence of a man presenting something already decided. Slides appeared on the screen in clean, authoritative type: arts program participation across target schools 23% and declining. Projected STEM sector job growth by 2035, 340%. Cost per student outcome: arts track versus STEM track, $2,340 versus $1,180. He spoke for 11 minutes without interruption. His language was careful. He never said cut. He said strategic reallocation. He never said eliminate. He said redirect toward career-ready programming. The numbers looked irrefutable. That was the point of them. The first parent up was a man named Gerald Osei, whose daughter sang in the 6th grade choir. He spoke about what music had done for her confidence, her grades, her sense of belonging. He held a photograph up toward the board. Whitfield listened with his hands folded and his expression composed. "Thank you, Mr. Osei. We appreciate your testimony." Gerald Osei sat down. He had been given 90 seconds. Ms. Patterson went next. She presented attendance, data, behavioral referrals, and academic performance broken down by students enrolled in arts electives versus those who were not. She had compiled it carefully the way she did everything. Whitfield listened. Then, "Ms. Patterson, can you speak to your sampling methodology? This appears to be a single school data set." "It is. Our school." Without a broader district-level comparison, it's difficult to draw generalizable conclusions. "Thank you for your time." Ms. Patterson returned to her seat, her expression unchanged. Diana knew that expression. It was the face of a woman who had been dismissed so many times she had learned to absorb it without flinching. Then Diana stood. Her voice was steady at first. She spoke about her students, the boy who had failed 3 reading assessments before joining the drama program and passed the 4th. The girl who stopped coming to school until a teacher put a paintbrush in her hand. She had notes, but she found she didn't need them. These were not abstractions. These were children she had watched. She was 4 minutes in when Whitfield leaned slightly forward. "Ms. Carter." His voice was not unkind. "That was almost the worst part of it. I understand your passion for your students. I genuinely do. But passion is not policy, and feelings, with all due respect, are not data. Diana stopped. She stood at that podium for one full second, long enough to feel the words land, long enough for everyone in the room to feel them land too, and then said quietly, "I have data. We've reviewed the available research. Thank you for your time." Diana walked back to her seat. She did not look at the board. She sat down next to Zola and stared at the table, her jaw tight, her eyes bright in a way that had nothing to do with tears or everything to do with refusing to let them fall. In the corner of her vision, she was aware of Zola's hand moving steadily across the notebook page, faster now than before. Whitfield looked out at the remaining rows. "We'll open the floor for any final comments before we proceed to the vote." The room went quiet. The air had gone out of it. The parents who had come prepared to speak were staring at their hands, their phones, the middle distance. The sustained institutional politeness of the dismissals had done what it always did, made resistance feel useless before it could fully form. Nobody stood. Harmon reached for his pen. Whitfield gave a small practiced nod. The ballot papers were already printed. The outcome had from the beginning been considered settled. Zola closed her notebook. She looped the rubber band carefully around the cover once, twice. She set it on her knee. And then from the corner of the room came the sound of a small chair being pushed back. Several people near the back did not notice at first. The chair made only a small sound, the brief scrape of metal legs against linoleum, and in a room full of adults adjusting in their seats, reaching for water cups, shuffling through printed agendas, it barely registered. The board member at the far left of the table, Dr. Simmons, was the first to look up. She saw a child standing at the edge of the public seating area and said nothing, waiting to understand what she was seeing. Whitfield noticed a moment later. He looked toward the corner with the practiced calm of a man who had learned never to appear surprised. He saw a small girl in a navy blue dress, white socks, old black shoes, a yellow notebook tucked under one arm, standing straight, not fidgeting, not looking around for reassurance. He offered the kind of smile adults produce when they are trying to be patient with something that is wasting their time. "Yes, can I help you, sweetheart?" A low murmur moved through the public rows. Someone near the window let out a short, quiet sound that was almost a laugh. Zola did not look at the person who laughed. She looked at Whitfield. "My name is Zola Carter. I'm 9 years old. I'm a student at Vine City Elementary." She paused exactly one beat. "And I have data." The murmur shifted. Something different moved through the room now, not amusement, but attention. The particular uncertain attention that happens when a situation refuses to behave the way everyone assumed it would. Whitfield's smile held, but it tightened slightly at the corners. "Zola, this is an official board proceeding. Perhaps your mother—" "My mother already spoke." Zola's voice was even. No anger in it, no performance. Just the flat, steady weight of something that was simply true. "You cut her off." The room went very still. Whitfield looked at her for a moment. Then he looked out at the rows of parents, at his fellow board members at Harmon. "I have 3 minutes of public comment time remaining," Zola said. "I'd like to use it." Whitfield set his pen down. He gestured briefly toward the space in front of the board table. "Go ahead." Diana did not move. She sat with her hands in her lap and watched her daughter walk forward, this child she had carried and worried over and tried imperfectly to protect, walking toward a room full of people who had already decided she didn't belong there. And something happened in Diana's chest that she was not prepared for. It started as a memory, the kind that arrives without warning and arrives whole, not a fragment, but an entire room, an entire moment fully rendered. A small kitchen in Savannah, Georgia. Yellow curtains, the smell of white rice and frying oil. A woman standing at the stove with her back to Diana, silver locks, wrapped in a headscarf the color of a summer sky. Diana had been 8 years old. She had come home from school crying because a teacher had marked her science project wrong. Not because the work was wrong. Diana knew it wasn't wrong, she had checked the library book 3 times, but because the teacher had not expected her to be right and had not known how to revise that expectation gracefully. Her grandmother had not turned around from the stove right away. She had stirred the rice. She had let Diana cry for exactly as long as it took for the crying to become something else. And then she had turned and looked at her granddaughter with eyes that held no pity and no performance, only the clear, serious attention of a woman who meant every word she ever said. "Baby," Grandma Cecile had told her, "you remember this. The most dangerous thing in the world is a little black girl who has already done her homework." Diana had been 8 years old. She had nodded because Grandma Cecile expected her to nod. She had not understood then. She understood now. Sitting in that boardroom watching her daughter stand in front of 11 adults who had dismissed her. Mother dismissed her principal, dismissed everyone who had come with something real to say. Diana felt the memory settle into her, like something that had been waiting 30 years to find the right place to land. Her eyes filled, not with fear, not with grief, with recognition. Whitfield nodded once, granting permission with the air of a man who expected this to be brief, gentle, and easily forgotten. Zola placed her notebook on the edge of the table closest to her. She did not ask if she could. She simply set it down open to the correct page and began. The proposal states that arts participation among target schools is 23% and declining. She said it plainly without accusation, the way you state the temperature outside. Then she looked up at the slide still displayed on the screen behind the board table. That figure comes from the 2019 District Participation Survey. I found the citation in footnote 4 of the supporting document. She looked back down at her notebook. The 2022 Georgia Department of Education Arts Impact Report, authors Tran Holloway and Bivens published September of that year, shows participation in the same target schools at 31% and rising, not declining. She turned the notebook slightly as if offering anyone who wanted to come and check. Nobody moved. The report is public. I printed it from the DOE website. It's on page 7. The board member to Whitfield's left, Dr. Simmons, typed something quickly on her laptop. Her brow was drawn together in the focused way of someone verifying rather than doubting. Zola continued. She did not raise her voice. She did not slow down or speed up. She moved through the data with the unhurried confidence of someone who had read these documents so many times that they had become familiar, not impressive, not intimidating, simply what they were. Numbers, pages, authors, years. She cited the 14% graduation rate differential. She referenced a 2021 Brookings Institution analysis on arts integration in Title I schools. She noted the specific page numbers. She did not editorialize. She did not appeal to emotion. She simply described what the research actually said, as opposed to what the slide behind Whitfield claimed it said. Across the room, a second board member had opened a laptop, then a third. Whitfield had not moved. His pen was still down. His hands were still folded. But something behind his expression had shifted, some small internal adjustment, like a building settling, and he was watching the child in front of him with an attention that was no longer casual. Gerald Harmon had put his phone in his jacket pocket. He was leaning forward now, both forearms on the table, looking directly at Zola. And in looking at her, he was looking at the notebook. At the pages of small, meticulous handwriting, the hand-drawn comparison charts, the column of source citations running down the left margin of each page, and in the upper right corner of the page currently open before her, he saw 4 words written in pencil, slightly smaller than the rest, as if they had been added as a reminder rather than a note. Harmon Academy denied. Why Harmon read the words. He looked at the girl. He looked back at the words. He did not yet understand what he was looking at, but something in him registered it the way you register a name you've heard before without yet knowing where. He reached for his pen, then he stopped. Zola turned to the next page. What was written there would make the room go completely silent. The next page held a single hand-drawn table, 2 columns labeled in Zola's small, precise print, FY 2021, Arts Spending and FY 2023 STEM Outcomes. Below the headers, a row of figures pulled directly from the proposal's own supporting appendix. And below that, underlined twice a note she had written in red ink, the only color on any page of the notebook. These are not comparable fiscal years. Zola set one finger on the table and looked up at the board. The cost comparison in the proposal, $2,340 per student for arts, $1,180, for STEM uses arts spending from fiscal year 2021, and STEM outcomes from fiscal year 2023. She said it without inflection. Those are 2 different years. The comparison only works if nothing changed between them. She paused. Something changed. In fiscal year 2023, the STEM track received a federal Title IV-A Technology Integration Grant. One-time funding, $47,000 applied across the participating schools. She turned the notebook so the table faced outward. That grant is listed in the district's federal funding disclosure report published on the DOE website in March. If you remove the grant from the FY 2023 calculation, the cost per outcome difference between arts and STEM drops by 62%. The room did not make a sound. Doctor. Simmons was typing hard now, not the tentative verification of a moment ago, but the rapid, purposeful keystrokes of someone who had already found what they were looking for and was reading it carefully. After a moment, she sat back. Her expression was not dramatic. It was the quiet, contained expression of a person confronting an accounting error they wished they had caught themselves. She's right, Dr. Simmons said to no one in particular. The grant. It's right here in the disclosure. Whitfield turned to look at her. It was the first time his face had moved in a way that was not controlled. Zola was still looking at the board. Her voice did not change. The numbers in the proposal aren't wrong, she said. They're just not complete, and incomplete data isn't data. She closed the notebook gently. It's a story someone chose to tell. The silence that followed was a different kind of silence than the room had held before. It had weight to it. It had direction. Harmon turned in his chair toward Whitfield. When he spoke, his voice was low, not intended for the room, but the room was quiet enough to carry it. Richard, did you know about the grant year? Whitfield did not answer immediately. He was looking at the table in front of him with the careful, deliberate attention of a man buying time. Richard, the committee reviewed the... Did you know? Whitfield said nothing. In a room that had gone completely still, that silence was its own answer. Zola reached into the back cover of her notebook and removed 2 folded sheets of paper. She had printed them at the public library 3 days earlier, paying 20 cents per page with quarters from the jar on the kitchen counter. She unfolded them and smoothed them flat against the table. In Brown versus Board of Education, she said, the Supreme Court held that equal educational opportunity is a constitutional right. Not a budget consideration, not a line item, a right. She looked up. In Plyler versus Doe, the court affirmed that states cannot deny children access to education based on circumstances they did not choose and cannot change. Her voice was steady, not loud, not performing. The children at Vine City Elementary did not choose their zip code. They did not choose which school district draws its boundary line 3 blocks from their front door. They did not choose which schools received arts funding and which ones didn't. They didn't make any of those decisions. She looked directly at the board. You did, and now you're asking them to pay for it. From somewhere in the 3rd row of public seating, a single pair of hands began to clap. Then another. Then a 3rd and a 4th, until the sound moved through the room like water, finding its level, unhurried, inevitable, filling every available space. Whitfield did not call for order. He was looking at his hands. It was Harmon who spoke next. He had been still for several minutes watching, thinking, recalculating something privately. Now he leaned forward and looked directly at Zola across the length of the conference table. Zola! His voice was measured. Careful in a way that was different from Whitfield's, careful, not defensive, but deliberate. You mentioned Harmon Academy on your notes. Did you apply? Zola looked at him. She had not addressed him directly until now. Yes, sir. 6 months ago. What happened with your application? It was denied. She said it the way she said most things without decoration. Missing a program certification signature? The arts program at my school doesn't qualify under Board Resolution 2024-17. So there was nobody authorized to sign, so the application was rejected automatically. Harmon held her gaze for a moment. Then he opened his laptop. He typed her name. First, last. Hit search. The foundation's applicant database loaded slowly. He scrolled, found the entry, read the status field. Zola Carter, Vine City Elementary, assessment scores, reading 98th percentile, math 97th percentile. Recommendation letters 3, rated exceptional. Application status denied. Reason program certification incomplete per Board Resolution 2024-17. Date of decision, May 14th. Harmon read it twice. He had signed the assessment results himself. He did that for every applicant, reviewed the top scoring files, personally wrote his initials in the corner, passed them to the selection committee. He remembered thinking back in May that the scores in the 98th percentile range were unusually strong that cycle. He remembered thinking the program was working. He had not seen the denial list. That was handled administratively. He had not known which names were on it or why, or that a policy passed by a board committee, a committee he had trusted, a committee chaired by the man sitting 2 feet to his left, had functioned as a quiet, efficient barrier between the children the program was built to reach and the door they were supposed to be able to walk through. He sat very still. Then he looked up at the child standing in front of him. 9 years old, navy blue dress, white socks, old black shoes, a yellow notebook she had filled over 3 weeks in the early mornings before her mother woke up. "Zola," he said. His voice was slightly different now. Something in it had shifted, not broken, but opened. "Your test scores. Do you remember what you received on the assessment? Reading 98th percentile." She said it without pride. "Just information." "Math 97th. Harmon nodded slowly. "I know. I signed the assessment results myself." Zola looked at him for a moment, the first pause she had taken since she stood up, the first thing that had given her reason to stop. "You're Gerald Harmon." "I am." She held his gaze. "Then you already know she's qualified," she said. She did not need to specify who she meant. They both understood. She meant every child in every school that board resolution, 2024-17, had quietly removed from consideration. She meant all of them. "You've known for 6 months. The room didn't explode. It didn't erupt. It went the kind of quiet that only happens when everyone in the room realizes at the same moment that something has just changed forever. For several seconds, nobody moved. Then Dr. Simmons closed her laptop, folded her hands on top of it, and spoke in the even procedural voice of someone who had made a decision and was not going to be talked out of it. "I'd like to make a motion to table the vote pending a full independent review of the financial data underlying the proposal, specifically the cost per outcome comparison and the fiscal year alignment." She looked down the table. "We should not be voting on numbers we haven't verified." Whitfield straightened. "The committee has already conducted a thorough. The committee missed a federal grant disclosure." Dr. Simmons did not raise her voice. A 9-year-old found it in 45 minutes with a library printer and a rubber band. "I think we can take another few weeks." A sound moved through the public rows, not quite laughter, not quite applause. Something between relief and recognition. Whitfield looked to Harmon. For a moment it seemed as if he was expecting support, the quiet alliance of two men who had until this morning been aligned on how this meeting would go. Harmon did not give it to him. "I'm seconding the motion," he said simply. "We need a full audit. This meeting is not the place to vote on a proposal with unresolved methodology questions." The vote on tabling passed 7-4. Whitfield gathered his papers from the table without speaking. He aligned them against the tabletop once, twice, a third time, the gesture of a man who needed something mechanical to do with his hands. He did not look at Zola as he stood. He did not look at Diana. He walked out of the meeting room ahead of anyone else, his footsteps measured and deliberate down the linoleum hallway, and then the door at the far end opened and closed, and he was gone. The room began to loosen. Chairs scraped back. Voices started up in low, urgent clusters. Parents who had sat in defeated silence 20 minutes ago were now leaning toward one another, phones appearing, conversations beginning that would not end for days. Ms. Patterson found Zola first and pressed both hands around the girl's face without a word, the way people do when language has not caught up yet with what they feel. Then she let go, straightened her coat, and looked at Diana. "I've been in this district for 27 years, she said. "I have never once seen anything like that." Diana nodded. She could not quite speak yet either. Harmon came out into the hallway 3 minutes later, moving with the purposeful quiet of a man who had something specific to do and was not interested in being stopped on the way to doing it. He reached Diana first. "Ms. Carter." He stopped in front of her and met her eyes directly. "Your daughter's application should not have been denied. The policy that blocked it was flawed, and I should have known it before today. I didn't. That's on me, and I'm sorry. Diana held his gaze. She had the look of someone deciding in real time whether an apology was the beginning of something or just the end of a conversation. Will the policy be reviewed? It will be rescinded, he said. Not reviewed, rescinded. She gave a single small nod. Then Harmon turned and looked down at Zola. He did not stay standing. He folded himself down slowly with the slight awkwardness of a tall man in a good suit trying to get to eye level with a 9-year-old and looked at her directly. That was one of the most prepared presentations I have seen in 20 years of attending board meetings. He said it without the softening tone adults often use when talking to children, without the pleasant inflation that signals they are not quite being serious. He said it the way you say something that is simply true. Where did you learn to read financial disclosure reports? Zola considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. YouTube mostly, and the public library. Ms. Patterson showed me how to find government documents online. Harmon was quiet for a moment. How long did it take you to prepare? 3 weeks. He nodded slowly. He looked at the yellow notebook still under her arm. Then he looked back at her face. Zola, are you going to fix the policy? She asked. Her voice was not challenging. It was the voice of someone following up on a stated commitment. Yes. And the arts program? He held her gaze. I'm going to do my best. Zola looked at him for a moment, measuring the answer, not the man. Then she gave a single careful nod. It was not enthusiastic. It was not dismissive. It was the nod of someone who had written down what was promised and would be checking later. Harmon, for the first time all morning, smiled in a way that had nothing formal about it. The parking lot was nearly empty by the time Diana and Zola reached the car. The temperature had not climbed still 44 degrees. The sky sealed flat and white above the bare tree lines of Trinity Avenue. Diana's breath came in small, visible clouds as she found her keys. She unlocked the car. They got in. She did not start the engine. For a minute, they simply sat there, the cold settling quietly around them. Zola pulled the notebook from under her arm and opened it to the last page that had writing on it. She uncapped her pen and drew a single line through something, a task Diana guessed that had just been completed. Zola! Diana's voice came out softer than she intended. How long were you working on that notebook? 3 weeks, Zola said without looking up. Since I found out about the meeting. Diana watched her daughter's pen move across the page. Baby. She stopped, started again. I'm sorry I didn't fight harder. 3 years ago, when I brought the arts expansion proposal to the board, when they rejected it, I just stopped. I put my head down. I told myself it wasn't worth it. Her voice caught slightly on the last few words. I told myself they wouldn't listen anyway. Zola capped her pen. She looked up at her mother across the small, cold interior of the car. Mama, she said, you fought. You just fought alone. She held her mother's gaze steadily. I was there this time. Diana pressed her lips together. She reached over and put her hand on her daughter's knee and kept it there. Outside the windshield, a crow landed on a nearby light pole, looked around without interest and flew away. Diana started the engine. 3 weeks after the board meeting, the Atlanta Unified School District announced a full audit of the budget reallocation proposal's financial methodology. The audit, conducted by an independent firm, confirmed the fiscal year misalignment Zola had identified, as well as 2 additional errors in comparative data sets that the Whitfield Committee had used to build its case for previous reallocation decisions. Board Resolution 2024-17 was formally rescinded by an 8-3 vote on a Tuesday afternoon in December, in a meeting room that was considerably fuller than it had been in years. Richard Whitfield retained his seat on the board. He did not retain the chairmanship of the Budget Oversight Committee. The arts program at Vine City Elementary remained funded. So did the arts programs at the 6 other schools that Board Resolution 2024-17 had quietly placed in jeopardy. Nobody threw a celebration. Nobody held a press conference. Things simply continued that would have been ended for hundreds of children if a small chair in the corner of a meeting room had not been pushed back at the right moment. But what happened next, nobody in that room had predicted, not even Zola. The envelope arrived on a Tuesday in February, 3 months after the board meeting. It was sitting on the kitchen table when Zola came home from school, white business-sized with the Harmon Foundation's Navy return address in the upper left corner. Zola set down her backpack, looked at it, picked it up, and opened it the way she opened most things, carefully without rushing, tearing along the top seam with one clean pull. She read it standing at the table. Read it once, then read it again. Then she set it down, picked up the apple she had been planning to eat, and sat in her usual chair. Diana appeared in the kitchen doorway 30 seconds later, still in her coat. She saw the open envelope on the table. She looked at Zola, who was eating her apple and looking out the window. "Zola!" Diana's voice was very careful. "What does it say? I got in." Zola did not look away from the window. Her voice carried the same inflection she used to report the weather or confirm that, yes, she had finished her homework. "Full scholarship, fall semester." Diana crossed the kitchen in 4 steps and picked up the letter. She read it once. Then she sat down in the chair across from her daughter and read it again, and the second time her hands were not entirely steady. "Dear Ms. Carter and Ms. Zola Carter, it is our honor to inform you that Zola has been accepted to Harmon Arts and STEM Academy beginning the fall semester. This acceptance carries a full 4-year scholarship covering tuition, materials, and program fees. This admission reflects not only Zola's exceptional academic scores, but her demonstrated capacity for civic reasoning, independent research, and moral courage." Diana set the letter down on the table. She sat very still for a moment, looking at it. Across the table, Zola finished her apple and stood to throw away the core. "Mama," she said on her way to the trash can, "stop crying. You're going to make me late for homework." Diana laughed, the kind of laugh that happens when you are going to cry, and something switches it at the last second. She pressed the back of her hand to her eyes. "I'm not crying." "Okay," Zola said in the voice she used when she was being polite about something. Harmon called 3 days later. Diana answered and listened for a moment, then carried the phone to Zola, who was at her usual place at the kitchen table, with a new notebook, blue this time, since the yellow one had been completely filled. "He wants to talk to you," Diana said. Zola took the phone. "Hello." Harmon's voice on the other end was measured the same as it had been in the hallway outside the board meeting. He explained that the foundation was establishing a new annual scholarship, 12 recipients per year, students in grades 3 through 5 drawn from the 4 lowest income districts in the Atlanta metro area. The selection criteria would not be limited to test scores. The primary focus would be what the foundation was calling demonstrated critical thinking and civic engagement. The kind of thinking that showed up not just in classroom performance, but in what a child chose to pay attention to and what they decided to do about it. He said he wanted to name it after Zola. There was a pause. "Can we call it something else?" Zola said, a longer pause on his end. "What would you want to call it?" Zola looked at the ceiling for a moment, the way she did when she was working something out. "The Fine Print Scholarship," she said, "because that's where the truth usually is, in the fine print that nobody reads." The silence on Harmon's end lasted long enough that Diana, watching from across the kitchen, raised her eyebrows in a question. Then Harmon said, "That's a better name than anything I had." The announcement event was held on a Thursday afternoon in March in the gymnasium of Vine City Elementary. It was not a gala. There was no catered food, no stage lighting, no string quartet. There were folding chairs arranged in uneven rows, a banner printed on heavy paper and taped to the back wall. The Fine Print Scholarship Harmon Foundation, and a microphone stand set up at the front that was several inches too tall for a 9-year-old. Harmon spoke briefly. Ms. Patterson spoke. Diana sat in the front row and did not speak because she had been asked to and had declined, and because some things did not need to be said out loud. Then Zola walked to the microphone. She reached up and adjusted it, pulled it down as far as the stand allowed, which was not quite far enough, so she rose onto the balls of her feet and stayed there, balanced the way she had balanced through all of it. Someone in the audience said something quiet, and there was a gentle ripple of warmth through the room. Zola did not have notes. When someone asked her afterward whether she had prepared remarks, she said, "I didn't need to. I already knew what I wanted to say." She looked out at the gym, the folding chairs, the parents, the teachers, Ms. Patterson in the back with her reading glasses pushed up into her hair, eyes unmistakably red at the corners. She looked at her mother in the front row, and then she spoke. "My grandmother always said the most dangerous thing in the world is a little black girl who has already done her homework. She paused not because she had lost her place, but because she wanted what came next to have room to land. I didn't know my grandmother, but my mama told me what she said, and I think she was right. She looked out at the room one more time. So do your homework. Read the fine print, and don't sit down until they have actually heard you. That was all. The room was quiet for exactly 1 second. Then it was not quiet at all. That evening, after the chairs had been folded and the banner taken down and the gymnasium returned to its ordinary self, Zola sat on the front steps of their apartment building in the cold. She was wearing Diana's coat over her own, the sleeves folded back twice so her hands could reach. In her lap was a book, a hardcover, its dust jacket, deep green with gold lettering, Thurgood Marshall, American Revolutionary. Harmon had handed it to her after the event without ceremony, the way you give someone something you have been holding for them. She opened the front cover. His handwriting was in blue ink, slightly cramped, running along the inside of the title page. For Zola, who read the fine print when the rest of us didn't bother, the world needs more people like you. G.H. Zola read the inscription once, nodded that small, deliberate nod she reserved for things that were accurate. Then she turned to page 1. The narrator does not know yet what Zola Carter will become. A constitutional lawyer, perhaps. A policy architect who closes the loopholes that trap children like her. A judge. A teacher like her mother staying after school to show a quiet kid how to find government documents on the DOE website. Perhaps something that does not have a name yet in a field that is still being built. She doesn't know either. Not yet. But she already has the most important thing. She knows how to read what other people skip. She knows how to stay standing when the room tells her to sit. She knows that truth doesn't need permission to exist. It only needs someone willing to do the work of finding it, writing it down in a yellow notebook, and walking it into the room where the decisions get made. The most dangerous thing in the world. And she has already done her homework. Before you go, I need to ask you something. Have you ever been in a room where you had the answer, where you knew the truth, where you had done the work, and the person at the front of that room looked right past you like you weren't there? Like your presence was something to be managed rather than something to be heard. Most of us have been in that room. Some of us have been in it our whole lives. Zola Carter was 9 years old. She was sitting in a folding chair in the corner. Nobody called her name. Nobody saved her a seat at the table. She stayed because she had already decided she was going to stay. And when the moment came, she stood up not because she was fearless, but because she had done the work, and the work was the thing that made her steady. There are children like Zola in every city in this country, in every underfunded school district, in every community where the budget meetings happen, in rooms that were never designed to hear them. They are sitting in the corners, watching, taking notes, figuring things out that no one told them to figure out because something in them already understands that the truth is in the fine print and someone has to read it. The question is whether we listen the first time. Before they have to prove themselves in a boardroom at 9 years old, what would you have done in that room? Would you have stood up? Would you have had 3 weeks of research in a yellow notebook and the steadiness to present it to 11 adults who had already made up their minds? And if a child stood up in front of you the way Zola stood up, would you have heard her, or would you have smiled the way Whitfield smiled? That patient, polished smile that says, "This is not for you. Sweetheart, sit back down. Tell me what you think in the comments." I read every single one. Tell me where you're watching from and what time it is in your city. Tell me if you know a Zola, a kid who is smarter than the room she's been placed in, who has been told in 100 small ways that her voice is not what this space was built for. If this story moved, you hit like. It takes 1 second and it helps more people find these stories. Share it with someone who needs to hear it today. And if you're not subscribed yet, now is the time, because we tell stories like this every week. Read the fine print, do your homework, and don't sit down.
And that's where the story ends, but Kama never sleep. If that story hit the different, smash the like button and subscribe to the Black Kama story. We drop new story every week about justice, betrayal, and Kama hitting by heart. And don't forget, ring the notification bell so you always first in line. Now, tell me in the comment, what would you have done in their shoe? I read every single reply. And now, see you in the next one. On Black Kama Stories, Kama always wins.